Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, and you're all very welcome to another Signpost Series webinar. But I hope you're all keeping well and looking forward to another really interesting presentation this week. The bioeconomy is a forward-looking approach to economic growth that harnesses renewable biological resources like crops, forests and microbes to sustainably produce food, energy and materials. It's where innovation meets nature to drive climate-smart solutions and circular thinking. And to mark Bioeconomy Week 2025 and discuss what it means to our sector, we're delighted to be joined this morning by Teagasc Principal Research Officer, Dr. Maeve Henchion. Good morning, Maeve.
Good morning, Cathal. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, how are you keeping today?
Good. Yeah, looking forward to chatting to and getting to know what people are interested about in relation to the bioeconomy too through this event. Thank you.
We're also joined by Teagasc Catchment Coordinator from Doolan, Fiona Doolan. How are you, Fiona? How are you keeping?
Morning, Cathal. All good here.
Fiona's going to help me man the ship today and look after questions with it. So yeah, we're in Bioeconomy Week, and it's a really a good time to have a chat about and I suppose open people's eyes up to what's going on with ourselves in our own country and what it's all about really. So I suppose the first question to ask is, how are we doing on bioeconomy? How well are we doing within Ireland?
Yeah, and I suppose whenever I've been working in this space kind of for a long time, and look, kind of over the last kind of probably 10 or more years, people have, whenever I've talked about the bioeconomy, people said, but what is the bioeconomy? So I think people are kind of getting their heads a little bit around it now. It was very much kind of in the policy domain, very much in the research domain, but I think we can see companies now are taking an active interest in it, and they are very much kind of recognising the opportunities that are presented by it. They're working with researchers, working with industry. So there's a lot kind of more activity, I think, kind of on the industry side, which is obviously what it's all about. There's no point in us doing research until we actually bring it into practice. And it's, you know, the policymakers recognise the potential of the bioeconomy, and our own Department of Agriculture in particular has been very supportive of the opportunities that it presents as well. So I think it's coming closer to having its day, I suppose.
Yeah, and I know we had a bit of a chat off air before we came on, and it's a very exciting space, and you know, there's so much to look at and so much to do, and there's a lot of ripple effects off it. So I think it's going to be a really interesting presentation.
Okay, no, thanks very much. And yeah, as I said, delighted to be here as part of Bioeconomy Ireland Week to be talking about the bioeconomy. So I am going to just briefly introduce what the bioeconomy is without going into a load of academic definitions, but really, you know, where it sits, and then, you know, what does it mean kind of from the perspective of different people who might be interested in the bioeconomy. Where are the opportunities? And, you know, there are multiple opportunities. I'll briefly just touch on the pre and post farm gate opportunities, but I'll focus today mostly on the pre-farm gate opportunities. And then I'll talk about questions that maybe we don't often ask ourselves, particularly in a research context, about feasibility and desirability of these developments and technologies, and then a little bit of looking towards the future. So when we think about what is the bioeconomy, it was initially, I suppose, really came very much from a policy domain, and it was all about, you know, trying to square the circle. There are finite fossil-derived resources. There's only a finite amount of oil. There's only a finite then amount of fossil-derived products that we can produce. So the bioeconomy represents an opportunity to produce renewable alternatives to these types of products. So what we call kind of bio-based products. From the European Commission perspective, and in the context of the Green Deal and those types of things, it was seen as an opportunity to decouple economic growth from environmental impact. So it's not just, we can continue to grow, but we can continue to grow without having a negative impact on the environment as a result of emissions or water quality or other challenges like that as well. It's also seen as a waste management solution, and I'll talk a little bit about some different perspectives on that in a moment. It's also a potential solution to climate change, and our own Department of Environment has very much recognised that as an opportunity that's presented by the bioeconomy, and is working very closely with our Department of Agriculture in all aspects relating to the bioeconomy as well. It's also a potential water quality solution, and we'll talk about that, the potential of the bioeconomy in relation to water quality slightly later on as well. But then I suppose at a more simple level, it's very much kind of an economic opportunity. It offers an opportunity for entrepreneurship, and particularly offers opportunities for economic development in rural areas. And then if we look at it's an opportunity for new businesses, but even it's an opportunity for new industry. Many of you will be familiar with the whey industry, and those of the older people who are watching, or like myself, will have remembered there was an era pre the whey protein industry, whereby whey was fed to pigs or had a very low value. So there's an opportunity to develop a new industry around that if we can back the right horse. And I suppose coming from a research perspective and recognising, we are in a very much a knowledge-based economy, the bioeconomy does offer us an opportunity to translate scientific research into innovation. So where are the opportunities? And there's multiple ways we can look at this. And just for today, I try to simplify it by looking at some of the pre-farm gate opportunities and some of the post-farm gate opportunities. If we look at the pre-farm gate, if we look at innovations, we're focusing on inputs, production practices, and land use or crop use as well. So there's a lot of research going on in Teagasc and elsewhere across all of these domains. The bioeconomy is about producing bio-based fertilisers and soil conditioners such as biochar. There's a lot of projects, for example, led by my colleague Patrick Forrestill in Johnstown Castle working on that. On the horticultural side, we need to look at replacements for peat. We can't extract peat from our bogs for horticultural use anymore, and we need to look at replacements there. And for example, my colleague Michael Gaffney has projects in that space. There's also opportunities around biopesticides. We have to look at alternative feeds. There's a challenge bringing in GM soya from other parts of the world, so we're trying to look at opportunities for that, not just in Ireland, but also in Europe. So we're looking at opportunities for alternative feeds, including duckweed. There's a lot of research done looking at particularly marine source origins to produce them as methane inhibitors for the livestock sector, the ruminant sector. We're looking at crops relating to circularity. So they're crops that can improve nutrient efficiency. So, think of the legumes and the clovers and those types of crops. We're looking at alternative proteins for food or for feed purposes as well. So we have projects such as the Valpro Path project led by my colleague Ewan Mullins, whereby we're looking at beans, lentils, lupins, crops like that. What can we do more with those for food and feed purposes? And then there's the energy crops and the biomass production, which brings us kind of from the food system, linking us into the energy system. There's anaerobic digestion. And I suppose that's a much more kind of a complex technology that offers broader opportunities than maybe just the simple kind of slot in alternatives for peat. The anaerobic digestion offers us an opportunity for broader agroecological integration, and that means we're bringing less inputs onto the farm, we're recycling more, we're looking at different types of outputs in terms of potential income diversification and things like that. We're bringing the digestate back into the soil to improve soil microbial activity and things like that as well. So it's not just about taking a feedstock and putting it into anaerobic digestion. There's a lot more when you think about anaerobic digestion and kind of the opportunities it presents, there's a much broader we can think about it much more broadly in terms of, agroecological integration. Carbon farming is an aspect that's of considerable interest to many people, and, they recognises the opportunity presented by agriculture to produce ecosystem services. So that's very much part of the bioeconomy. And some of you will have heard about grass biorefining, using grass. At the moment, we use the rumen to translate non-human edible grass into human edible food, but there are opportunities to replace the rumen with other types of technologies and to get other types of outputs from grass as well. So there's a lot of activity in that space in Teagasc and in other organisations in Ireland and indeed across Europe and elsewhere as well. So just to shift focus a little bit briefly, looking at the post-farm gate. So when we look at post-farm gate, there we're looking at processing, distribution and consumption. So work that's been done in that space is looking at biorefineries, particularly in the context of food waste, co-products and industrial waste valorisation. So when we talk about co-products, for example, we've done some work looking at opportunities in the meat industry. So when an animal is slaughtered, only about half of it is actually meat. So we produce animals for meat, but there's a lot of other co-products there. What can we do with those? In the dairy industry, there's a lot of kind of waste water as well that contains proteins and other valuable compounds. can we do work with that? So there's research being done on those types of opportunities as well, and the industry is very much engaged in those types of projects. There's also, as Cathal introduced at the start, this isn't just about crops and animals. It's also very much about microbes and the opportunities that they present for us. And there's a lot of work, particularly involving my colleague Olivia McCullough in Moore Park, looking at biotransformation, bioprocessing, precision fermentation, very much looking at the opportunities that microbes and developing particular types of microbes that can perform very specific functions. So there's a lot of very sophisticated science being done in that space. And then there's the whole area of bioplastics and smart packaging as well. So there are opportunities all across the value chain in terms of the bioeconomy. So I'm going to focus a little bit more now on the opportunities, the pre-farm gate opportunities. And I went with our Director of Research, Pat Dillon, up to the north recently, and we visited BH Estates in County Antrim. And I just want to show you some photographs we have from that, and then I'll talk us through a little bit more about what it means. So what they do up here is they take slurry from the slurry tanker, and they're using this mobile unit here to extract the solids, separate the solids from the liquid in the slurry. And here you'll see a little bit more closely here. There's an auger here that's bringing the solids up along the chute and bring it into the trailer. This is what it looks like in the pit. So you can see it's a fairly dry type of product, but it's probably of not much use to many people here. And you certainly couldn't imagine doing, spreading it on your land, or your contractor would look at you a bit queer, I'm sure, if they asked them to spread that on your land. So they're looking at producing pellets, and obviously that's a much easier product to spread. So we can see that the technology has been developed. So we're thinking, great, this is the way to go. But obviously, I'm sure many of you will be saying, what about this and what about that? And that's very much, there's a lot of questions still to be asked. And we can see here, the people are asking, what about feasibility? What's the economic aspect of this? How are you going to gather up the slurry? Will this involve a lot of transport being moving around? And then what about the desirability? What impact will it have on the local farmers? What impact will it have on the local residents? What do anybody who's involved in this kind of think about it? So when this project was developed, it was very much seen as a water quality issue. And the thinking behind this is that they're taking the phosphates in particular from the individual farm, so that it's not resulting in water quality pollution, because, as you know, Lough Neagh is a big issue, and the phosphorus in Lough Neagh is a challenge. So the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, they're investing 4 million into the BH Estates kind of concept there to scale that up. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to be looking at environmental assessments, because an important thing to remember, even though the bioeconomy is a fantastic concept, it's not inherently sustainable. So you have to ensure that the solutions you're implementing and the way you're implementing them is actually going to result in a net benefit. So you might be addressing water quality, but you might have a lot of transport of slurry going around. So you need to think about what's the optimum distance that you can transport slurry, and then you have to talk to farmers about how they can use they get back they keep the liquid fraction. How can they use the liquid fraction of the slurry on their land in terms of their overall nutrient management plan? So there's lots of additional questions to be asked there, and that's in the context of Northern Ireland. But we also very much recognise the potential of biofertiliser and slurry and industrial waste in Ireland. And there has been, as part of a shared island, so an all-island initiative, there's the project funded by the jurisdictions north and south, investing about 4.5 million in farm residues and looking to create sustainable fertilisers, addressing both environmental and industrial goods. So very much a recognition of the potential there. So even though the technology has been developed, we have to think about how is it going to be implemented in practice. And there's a lot of money still to be invested to bring people on board and to see, to demonstrate these technologies in practice. I think that's an important part of these projects as well. Obviously, farmers will want to see what does it look like in practice, and what's it going to mean for me in my farm. So this brings me then to a PhD study conducted by Raja Shinde who was a Teagasc Walsh scholar based in UCC and linked to the Marais Centre, and the co-supervisors on the project are mentioned there. But what Rajas did was he looked at grass biorefining and trying to see, we know that very significant percentage of the agricultural land in Ireland is obviously under grass. We grow grass very well, and as I mentioned, there's an opportunity to think about replacing the rumen with other technologies to get other products from the grass. And this is just a generic type idea in terms of what can be done with grass. So you can start by mechanical pressing and separating the juice from the pressed cake. And the juice can result in very high value added products like protein concentrate, amino acids, lactic acid, and it can be a fermentation medium. So in terms of the protein concentrate and amino acids, a lot of those can be put into animal feed, but they're put into monogastric feed, so pig and poultry, which is obviously a higher added value feed than ruminant feed. The pressed cake, however, it's still valuable. It can produce fibre materials. It can go back to ruminants, and a big advantage of the pressed cake is that it contains less nitrogen, it's less protein than the grass itself. So it contains less nitrogen and results in less emissions than the actual grass itself. So that it feeding pressed cake as opposed to grass can be a part of a nutrient management kind of solution as well, and it can be producing biomaterials or can go into combustion. But the whole thing as well, in terms of the bioeconomy, you have to think about using everything. So the residues then go into anaerobic digestion and can produce biogas and biofertilizer. So that's a lot of the way that grass biorefining has been thought about to date. But there are other opportunities to think about it in a more kind of integrated way as well, and to look at higher added value opportunities. So this, I'm not going to go through this, don't worry, and I'm not going to expect you to look at all the different arrows. But really what this graphic illustrates, which was prepared by Rajas, is that there's a whole range of technologies that can be implemented to produce a whole range of different types of products from either fresh grass or from grass silage. So you can have, here we have up in this talks about mechanical processes, this talks about biochemical processes, and this talks about thermochemical processes. So you can implement those in different combinations and sequences to produce different types of products down here. So some of these products are very high added value and some of them are less high added value. So depending on how you put the technologies together, you can prioritize different types of outputs from that. So obviously there's different costs associated with it, and different technologies are at different stages of development. So what Rajas did then was he asked experts about the potential of some of these value chains. And he asked them in particular about four. He tried to, you can't ask people about, 40 or 50 different value chains. So he tried to bring those down to a fairly a manageable number of value chains that experts could consider. And he looked at anaerobic digestion of fresh grass or grass silage to produce biogas and allied products. So the one that I talked you through earlier on. But then he looked at the mechanical pressing and the processing of fresh grass. He looked at mechanical pressing and processing of grass silage. But then really what his overall project was about was this more sophisticated two-stage AD and thermochemical processing of grass silage, where he was trying to produce high added value chemicals for industrial use and biogas and biofertilizer, and trying to optimize the system so that you would produce the biogas to peak demand from an energy perspective, and then when there's less demand for biogas, you would let the system produce the other high added value products. So you would get the highest value from the biogas, the highest price from the peak demand price, and then you would look at developing the other products around that. So after going through this exercise with the various experts, the recommendation he came back with was that the basic anaerobic digestion, even though it in itself may not be seen as particularly attractive, or there are other, as I say, higher added value opportunities, you need to have the foundational value chains in place, because they help us to build our capacity, build our knowledge, and think about how we can do these things in the future. And remember that if you remember back to the original graphic that I showed you, AD is going to be probably where the end point of a lot of value chains. So if we can develop anaerobic digestion, the other value chains will have more potential kind of as well in the future. He then had recommendations for the kind of more medium term value chains. And one of the things that he pointed out here was, you have to think about farmer and public buy-in. And then he talked about the ones that are a bit more complex and longer term, and emphasizing the issue of social acceptance. So that brings me on to another PhD study here. So if we're thinking about the bioeconomy, it's sometimes we're thinking about just replacing one product with another. So sometimes you mightn't even notice it. So, if we're getting renewable energy into our houses, we don't, whether it comes from wind or water or, coal burning or oil burning, it doesn't make any difference to us. So it doesn't really affect us. But if we think about other innovations, it can have a more significant impact and require more change from us. So this was a conceptual framework for biofuel that was developed by Chin et al. In 2014. And when he talked about, he just kind of set it up kind of as a value chain. So when you're developing biofuel, you're growing it, you're harvesting it, you're producing the biofuel, and then you're bringing it to the market. But there are different stakeholders who have different perspectives on these as well. So he just developed this framework. When you're thinking about, the feedstock and growing it and harvesting it, and you're thinking about the production facilities and producing it, you have to think about the community who are involved in that. So that community isn't just the local residents, it's also the public, it's the farmers who are growing it, it's the farmers who aren't growing it, and it's the industry that are going to be involved in the production. When you're thinking about biofuel, you're thinking about market acceptance, and that market is both the industrial market as well as the consumer market. So the petrol stations, they have to be willing to take it on board, and the as well as the people who are driving the cars, and then the car manufacturers have to take it on board as well. So there's lots of things that you need to be thinking about there. But there's a much broader kind of socio-political acceptance that has to be considered as well. So it's not just a matter of growing a feedstock, producing it, and then selling it. You have to think about all the people who might be affected or who might influence it, and think about the factors that would influence their acceptance. So we applied this framework in a very general way to looking at bioplastics. So this was a PhD study by Nima Nejadrezai, and he's just finished that. And he looked at consumers and bioplastics and looked at the factors that might affect their acceptance of and influence their decision making with regards to that. Now, this is a very complicated model, and I'm not going to go through it with you. But really what I wanted to show here is that when people are thinking about, do they accept a product or a technology or an innovation or not, first of all, they have to be interested in it. They have to intend to do something. They have to be willing to pay for it, and they have to actually go out and buy it. And different factors affect different stages of that decision-making process. And I just want to draw your attention to two aspects here. The early decision-making stages were shaped by attitudes, norms, trust, and belief. But the later decision-making stages were more influenced by social norms. So that's, what do other people think? What do other people do? So really that the overall adoption is very much influenced by significant others. And he came up with various recommendations based on the various perspectives that different stakeholders had with regards to bioplastics. And he said, strengthening the positive attitudes by highlighting the benefits of bioplastics is very useful. But also there's particularly in relation to anything to do with the environment, there's two very important concepts here. And this is the AC, which is the awareness of the consequences, and the AR, which is the ascription of responsibility. So if people are aware of the consequences of their behaviour and consider that they have a responsibility to address that behaviour, that can very much influence how you communicate with them and how you can influence their behaviour. So he had some interesting findings there. But I just want to move us on to I suppose probably an area that's linked back to the previous work more. And this was a PhD study done by Mina Sadigzada in Teagasc. And what she did was she looked at acceptance of biorefineries, grass biorefineries and AD amongst farmers and the general public in the southwest of Ireland. And she found that different factors affected acceptance of technologies by farmers versus the public. And so for example, we can see on the left the factors that influenced acceptance by farmers. So perceived benefit, perceived behavioural control, and what that means is the extent to which they can participate in grass biorefining, to the extent to which they would be able to supply Grass Biorefinery, and then personal norms, the extent to which they would value and feel it was important. But we can see that there are different factors here, and they're the factors I've highlighted in bold. They're the additional factors that influence the public's acceptance of Grass Biorefinery. So it's their attitude towards that technology, it's their trust in the institutions and people who are developing the technologies, and it's also justice. So that's justice looking at it from the procedural perspective, the processes and decision making that's involved, and also in terms of the distribution of benefits, who actually benefits from this technology or who has a negative impact. So there's more factors influencing the public acceptance of grass biorefining versus the farmer acceptance. But then if we look and move on to the farmer acceptance of anaerobic digestion, we can see there are different factors coming into play here again too. So justice comes in here for farmers in relation to anaerobic digestion, and trust and cost. So just, the factors that would influence farmers' acceptance of one technology are not the same as their acceptance of the other technology. And similarly for the public, down at the bottom right there, it's the factor supporting grass biorefining. But an additional factor comes into play in relation to anaerobic digestion, and that's the one that I've highlighted in red down there. That's place attachment, and that relates to the extent to which people feel part of their local part of their local region, and the extent to which they feel belonging there, and the extent to which they feel, there's nowhere like this place in the rest of the world. So that's coming in for the public in relation to anaerobic digestion. So I think, you can see it's the acceptance of anaerobic digestion probably would be a little bit different to grass biorefining. So she came up with a whole heap of recommendations that you can, so when you recognise that personal norms are important, when you recognise that trust and fairness and justice and those are important, you can come up with particular recommendations that can help to address those. So for example, there, in terms of building trust, ensuring fairness and enabling farmers to participate, there's a lot of activities there, for example, for organisations like Teagasc, whereby we could organise sessions that allow farmers to express their concerns, priorities and practical needs, organise on-farm demonstration sites, facilitate peer learning and provide practical examples. So we can see that, there's a great logic in the funding provided by DAERA and by the All Ireland Fund for the two initiatives I spoke about earlier on, the 4.5 and the £4 million expenditure, that the enabling on-farm demonstration sites, facilitating peer learning and providing practical examples is very much part of those projects. And then farm advisory services that deliver targeted training helps to facilitate perceived behavioural control, in particular enabling farmers to feel that they can contribute and participate in that. Similarly, for perceived justice, it's very much about having participatory governance structures involving people in the decision making, having a dialogue throughout the development, both before, during and after the development. And then in terms of the public, it's having customised educational campaigns. It's not just about telling them about things. It's very much recognising the concerns that they have and making sure the educational campaigns are very much targeted to the concerns that they have, aligning with local figures and highlighting local benefits. So just the conclusions of that is farmers approach each innovation differently. So engagement strategies must be aligned with the behavioural logic unique to each technology. So grass biorefining versus anaerobic digestion is different. Grass biorefineries, they are likely to benefit from hands-on demonstration and peer learning, while for anaerobic digestion, adoption depends more on trust building, fairness and institutional clarity. And similarly for the public, they have different behavioural logics to farmers, so you have to deal with those in a different way as well. Now, we only looked at farmers and the public. There are other stakeholders might have different behavioural logics as well, but we didn't investigate that. So I suppose just in terms of looking to the future, there's a few challenges as we look to the future. I mentioned this earlier on. We have to remember that the bioeconomy is not inherently sustainable. Just because we all think this is a great thing in the future, and as researchers we can often get carried away with our techno-optimism, but that isn't going to create a sustainable food system. So what we need to do then is to do a lot of environmental assessments, do a lot of modelling work. The Goblin model developed by our colleagues in his first name won't come to me, David Stiles in the University of Galway, as part of the Inform Bio project, is doing a lot of work looking not just at the climatic impacts, but also developing the model now to look at water impacts as well of various scenarios. And as part of the Bio Value project led by another colleague in the University of Galway, Cathal O'Donoghue, he has a SMILE model, which is an economic model looking at the impacts as well. So there's a lot of work that can be done to look at, what's the impact of these various technologies going to be. We also have to recognise that there are trade-offs. So while we might want to have economic sustainability, we have to think about environmental and social aspects. And even within that, as you know, we have to think about the trade-offs within environmental. We might be reducing greenhouse gas emissions or addressing phosphate problems, but we might be creating another problem somewhere else. So again, all that modelling work is very, very important there. But the other thing that could be useful there is, researchers working together. So if the more we will kind of collaborate with each other, think about things from different perspectives, and that transdisciplinarity, which means that we're working with people outside of the academia as well, working with industry, working with community organisations, we can think about those issues as well. There are going to be competing priorities and values. Some people will say, yes, we do want renewable energy, but we don't necessarily want, a lot of lorries going up and down, bringing slurry up and down the road beside us. So how can we ensure that we are inclusive in our development? So we do need to think about questions such as desirability as well as feasibility. We have to be concerned with issues such as equity and justice, and concepts such as power and trust. And we have to remember it's more than about the value chain actors. It's more than about the farmers, the processors, the retailers, the consumers. There are many other people who are going to be impacted by bioeconomy developments as well. So we have to think beyond actors to stakeholders, those who are affected or can affect the development of the bioeconomy. So just another kind of thing is we need to think about, the market isn't going to develop all of this. We do need the market, and we do need policy to support market creation. But in the broader context, we need research to support the design of effective policy instruments. This isn't just about providing grants and subsidies, which that's an easy solution to bring the bioeconomy into reality. There's a much broader range of policy instruments we need to be thinking about there, including the kind of the knowledge development, the knowledge exchange, and the demonstration type activities. They're all part of effective policy instruments as well. And just a few final comments. When we're thinking about the bioeconomy, we do have to think about the impact of developments at different points of the value chain. And a useful concept to think about as well is the cascading concept. So, anaerobic digestion, as I mentioned, from Rajas's work, we concluded that we do need to develop, the energy, which is seen as the lowest value opportunities. But we really need to start from thinking about where are the highest added value opportunities. Because if we go one route, we don't have a finite source of feedstocks either. We do have to think about, where can these feedstocks be best valorized? Where are the best opportunities for these feedstocks, and work our way down from that. And recognize as well that value chains are interconnected. So if we develop one value chain, it may be to the cost or benefit of others. And I just mentioned Rajas's conclusion there as well, in terms of what he was looking at there. So I suppose what I just want to say here is, the bioeconomy is coming into reality. It was very much in the policy and research space, but we've just had there's a new feasibility study by Arabon and Tipperary Co-op, and that was on the agri-land there in September. And they're looking at a new cooperative model for biorefineries. So again, going back to the point, this isn't just about technologies. We have to think about the business models that are around this as well. So can farmers do this in a cooperative model, or is this all about individual investors and multinationals as well? So that's just to show this is coming into reality. And you will have heard of other companies who are involved in research projects as well, but I think this is very much ICOS have taken this on board and are leading out on this. Finally, just to say, this is the strategy statement of strategy from the Department of Agriculture, and I just want to, I suppose, highlight how important the Department of Agriculture sees the bioeconomy. So the Minister's statement in the introduction to the strategy particularly calls out the bioeconomy, and the wording he uses here is it will also require a focus on research innovation, the development of new ways of monetising agri-food outputs, including through opportunities in the circular and bioeconomy. So in his minister's statement, he very much calls out that. And when you look then at the Sorry, now this just isn't going down for me. When we look at the programme for government, which underpins that strategy, it talks about developing Ireland's bioeconomy through a coordinated approach that harnesses Ireland's natural resources and competitive advantage. So that's the broader programme for government that's called out as part of the Department of Agriculture's strategy statement. But then if we look at the particular strategic objectives that are called out in the strategy as well, I think it's very, the priority actions here are, they talk about leading the development of a strong bioeconomy. So I think just very much emphasising the leadership role here. We're not going to be followers. We are going to be leading, and the Department of Agriculture is very much committed to leading it as well through national, international policy, funding, and cross government collaboration. And obviously calling out the marine bioeconomy as well. This isn't just about agriculture. It's very much agriculture, forestry, marine in terms of the primary production sectors, but also linking through to the further industrial processes as well. So I suppose in conclusion, there are lots of opportunities in the circular bioeconomy. The challenge is to identify the ones we want to pursue. And I think really many voices will be required to make the right decisions, whether that's the right decisions in terms of economics or whether that's the right decisions in terms of equity. I suppose that's something that'll have to be teased through. But regardless, I think it's all about collaboration and working together because the bioeconomy involves multiple value chains, it's cross-sectoral. The only way it will deliver is, bringing those many voices together. So I just want to acknowledge the Teagasc scholars, Mina, Nima and Rajas, whose work I have quoted there, and the various PhD supervisors in Teagasc, UCC, UCD and TUD, and colleagues in the various other projects that I mentioned as well. But just to remind you, this is Bioeconomy Ireland Week, and you can get more information on Bioeconomy Ireland Week at this website, www.irishbioeconomy.ie.
That was great, Maeve. Thank you very much. I loved your the second last slide where you said there's lots of opportunities, and so the whole way through your presentation, I was kind of thinking, where do you start? There's so many things to look at, and a lot of your time must be taken into trying to identify particular areas. But the one thing that kept popping into my brain was our issues around food security, and we're always hearing that we need to produce more food. There's issues around climate change and certain regions that can't grow food, and then the population is growing. And then it kind of turns back to what you're trying to focus on. And this is a quick Google, so don't quote my figures here, but Ireland produced something like just over 800,000 tons of food waste. Europe, 58 million tons per year. There must be an awful lot of opportunity in that area to try and balance that whole food security issue out.
Absolutely, yeah. And I suppose when we think about food waste is generated at various points in the chain. And, you have the food waste coming from the catering sector, the food waste coming from the kind of co-processing streams. But there's also obviously waste that arises at farm level. And we have an EU funded project at the minute called Rosetta. And in that, we're looking at what we call the wonky carrots. So the carrots that aren't straight or a little bit twisted or whatever, and that just don't make their way onto the retail shelves, but yet are perfectly edible. And we demonstrated them at the Ploughing Championships actually this year. We developed a whole range of products in our National Prepared Consumer Food Centre here, and we incorporated those wonky carrots into carrot cake, obviously, but also carrot bread, falafels, juices, and even into chocolates. So we had a whole range of products there, and I think really what we need to do is think about how we can use these perfectly edible products and put them into food products. But there's a broader perspective as well around that, because you mentioned kind of food security, and we're a lot of where we import a lot of particularly horticultural products, and there are opportunities to grow, for example, our carrot sector here. But if we grew our carrot sector, we would have more carrots, which would be a great thing, but we'd also have to store more carrots. And the more you store things, the more kind of loss you have. So you'd have more, and you'd also have more wonky vegetables then. So that brings the kind of the opportunity for the bioeconomy and the valorization of those wonky carrots more into scope as well. Because if we're expanding our production of carrots, we also need to be thinking about the wonky carrots and how we can ensure they're not wasted and contribute to the bottom line of the primary production in the first instance as well.
Yeah, I love the example of the wonky carrot, and I am a big fan of carrot cake. But we can all be accused of not picking up that bad piece of fruit or a bad apple or whatever. And at the same time, you make a really important point here that we're always giving out that we'd like to buy more Irish vegetables and fruit, but they're not on the market. So I suppose the big question for me is when you're coming up with all these ideas, and you touched on it about trying to convince the farmers maybe to get involved. It can be big changes to the way they do business, can't it? And that's probably a bit of a barrier.
It can, no, absolutely. And even simple things, like shifting from being alive, producing grass to feed an animal to producing grass to put into grass biorefinery. It fundamentally changes the identity of the farmer, because a lot of livestock farmers, as you know, Cathal, take great pride in their stockmanship and their ability to recognise when an animal is sick, or to select a good animal in the mart in the first instance, and to know when the animal is ready. So even though they might be good at growing grass, it changes their identity from being a livestock farmer to being a grass producer, and that's fundamentally different. And it's not just about kind of advising the farmer how to grow grass for biorefining. It also is about supporting them to think about how they do their business a little bit differently, and they won't be going to the mart anymore, so there's really kind of practical things like that that'll have an impact, and that farmers will miss, on top of the whole thing about the economics and all of that, and the construction of the grass biorefinery, wherever that's going to be and how that's. So there's real human issues that need to be considered, along with all those kind of technical issues and economic issues as well.
Yeah, but at the same time, a lot of opportunity, and the way we are at the moment, we need those opportunities to have a variety of the way we make our money. Fiona, I think there's a lot of questions coming in there.
There is, Maeve. We might start with a broader question, if you don't mind. Somebody has asked, what do you see as the difference between the circular economy and the bioeconomy? Are they the same? Are they different? Are they a subset of one another? The bioeconomy versus the circular economy?
Yeah, no, a good question, a question we often get asked. And there's another concept to confuse people, the sustainable circular bioeconomy. So that's another one. So to me, so there's a very good graphic produced by the a foundation. The name fails me, but it's a butterfly, and it depicts the circular economy in terms of the bioeconomy side of it, and then the more material side of it. So if you think about the construction industry, for example, so if they're trying to recycle wood, or they're trying to recycle concrete, or they're trying to recycle any materials that aren't biological, that's the pure circular economy. But if we're thinking about biofertilizer, and we're thinking about waste and things like that, that's when you're in the circular bioeconomy. But then there is a bit of the bioeconomy that's not necessarily circular as well. But I think to be sustainable, we need to link both. We need the sustainable circular bioeconomy when we're thinking about agriculture and food. But there is the whole circular economy, which is around the materials, the clothes, recycling, all of those kind of fabrics. That's the circular bioeconomy. It's not biological, I suppose. Yeah.
There's a number of questions here, Maeve, about that the grass biorefinery process you mentioned there. Has there been any studies done, do you know, to look at the carbon side of that, or the greenhouse gas emissions point of view? Is it energy intensive for the benefit that will be achieved out of it, or is that something that really needs to be looked into yet?
I think there's been some work done on that. Now, I'm not an expert in that space, but I think absolutely those questions need to be asked and answered, because, as I mentioned, the bioeconomy isn't inherently sustainable. So we do have to consider all of those. And, some of the waste management solutions do involve quite intensive energy, and even, the biofertilizer, the separation of the solid and the liquid isn't necessarily energy intensive. But that whole process of pelletization of the fertilizer probably is energy intensive. So that's part of the work that they will be doing. So it's the same type of thinking that you need to bring for all of these technologies. You do have to see, what is the impact in terms of emissions, water quality, and all of those, and how does it compare to the existing kind of use of those feedstocks. So absolutely, all of those questions need to be asked.
And maybe you gave us a lot of really good examples from Ireland, but are there international examples that we should probably look at, or countries that are maybe further along this road than we are?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of other European countries working in this space, and we developed a bioeconomy policy statement in whatever year that was. I think maybe 2014. We were probably middle of the league in terms of countries that have or haven't developed bioeconomy strategies. So I think we have good capacity and good knowledge, but there are countries that are ahead of us that we can learn from. And Denmark is one particular example. So various study tours have been organised by various groups to bring farmers and other stakeholders to Denmark to see how these things are operating in practice. So Denmark would be a country that we would be looking towards to learn from in particular.
It's quite interesting. There's a number of questions here bringing up the whole area of hemp and the potential development of the hemp sector. So it's obviously something that's on people's minds. Is it an area, do you know, that has been looked at in terms of the bioeconomy, or is there, real prospects there potentially down the road?
Yeah, I suppose I know particular people are interested in that, and I know that there was kind of a demonstration of the various products that can be produced by hemp by a group at the ploughing the year before last, I think, and it is very impressive what we can do with hemp from kind of a technical perspective. But there's a huge barrier there, and that's the regulatory aspects. So there's no point in us talking about what we can do with hemp, unless kind of those regulatory issues are overcome, and there is no future for hemp in Ireland until that can be addressed. But there certainly are very valuable products that can be produced from hemp. We can grow hemp in Ireland, but there's no point unless we get those regulatory. There's no point in even discussing it unless that's something that can be addressed.
I think the great excitement around hemp was, I remember a couple of years ago on TV, there was I think a farmer came on and they were talking about what they're doing with hemp, and they were showing that if you're able to use it to its maximum ability, you could actually make up to €30,000 per hectare or something like that. Really good money. So I think that's where the excitement is. But I think it's rightly to say that regulation always out trumps what we're trying to do, and we have to get that in place first.
Another comment maybe on the area of desirability. You mentioned that earlier on. Somebody has brought up the topic of, say, biochar, which you mentioned, but how desirable is that, or how the desirability of a product or a service can impact then on its potential at all?
Yeah, it can, absolutely. But I suppose, we have to remember as well, when we look at desirability, at a point in time. And it depends on, what's going on in the media at the time around these kind of issues as well. But it also depends if people have seen these in practice. So sometimes if you ask somebody about biochar, and they need to see biochar, they need to touch it, they need to feel it. But if you ask them about it in kind of an abstract sense, they might likely reject it because it mightn't sound nice, or they mightn't like the idea of it or whatever. But when you bring it into practice and people see it and feel it, they can think about it in a different way. And that's when I talked about the different sequences of acceptance as well, that there are different factors that influence things at different stages. But I suppose the other thing to remember is, just because somebody doesn't accept it now doesn't mean that they won't accept it in the future. And a great example of that really is the whole idea of GM. That was very much rejected by everybody in the past, because these big companies were coming in with these chemicals that weren't going to benefit anybody, only themselves. In the kind of the Monsanto example that we had with maize there. But now I think people are recognizing the potential of GM, and there's an evolution over time for people to accept GM. So that just because someone doesn't accept it doesn't mean that they won't accept it in the future, but it does create hurdles that would have to be overcome. So that's why it's, you talk to people before you do things, and you bring people with you and understand their issues and their concerns, and address those as you're working through it.
And maybe you've certainly piqued people's curiosity. There's a question here about, you mentioned marine, and the potential that's there as a source of product for the bioeconomy. Have you any examples that you could perhaps give there? Because obviously people are thinking, oh, what could this mean?
Yeah, well, it's not my area of expertise, but my colleague here, Brajesh Tiwari, has two big projects in that space at the moment that are funded by the Department of Agriculture. And they're looking at, there's, again, similar to the meat idea, when you take a fish and you take the fillet off it, there's a lot of bones and other things that are left there. There's a lot of what's called chondroitin and other things that can be produced. You've heard of chondroitin for cosmetics and things like that there. So there's a lot of high added value things that can be produced there. Fish meal is something that would have been a product that people are familiar with. Fish oils and all of those things as well. But there's also research that's done in the marine side in relation to micro and macro algae and the opportunities that's presented by those. And my colleague Maria Hayes here has done a lot of work and is looking at extracting various things from that. And we know that algae can be fed to cattle to reduce their methane emissions as well. So there's no more than the opportunities that are in agriculture. All of these feedstocks can produce multiple products of various kind of values. And I suppose the trick is to see, if you remember back to the grass process diagram that I showed you, that we can put different technologies together in different ways to produce different types of outputs. But the idea is we have to think about what's the optimal, which ones produce the highest yield and the highest value, and to work towards those. But biochemicals for industrial use, cosmetics, the food, it's loads of opportunities in marine, same as in agriculture.
And Maeve, as I look at the screen, people are putting in comments about various other alternatives. It could be wool or the wool industry or seaweed or, so on and so forth. There obviously is a huge need for research and development to look at the potentials rather than just pass it off. Is there a lot of research in this area? Or where does somebody go if they have a potential idea that they want to see? Is it feasible, or how to take it on to the next steps?
Yeah, there has been a lot of research done, looking at all these various technologies. MTU, Munster Technological University, they have a lot of expertise down there. James Gaffey down there in particular has a lot of expertise. We've been doing work in Teagasc. The Bioorbic, the Irish Bioeconomy Centre funded by Research Ireland, that's a centre of excellence in terms of the bioeconomy as well. So there's a number of, I would say MTU, Teagasc and Bioorbic in particular would be three kind of sources. But yeah, there's huge opportunities there. But I suppose the thing is to think about, how developed are these technologies? Are they ready for commercialization yet? Issues around kind of regulation, are they all resolved? So there's questions like that have to be addressed. But I suppose I should mention as well, the two departments, the agriculture and environment departments, they are working at the moment to develop a bioeconomy strategy. So I think that'll probably help to give a bit of direction in terms of where the opportunities are as well. And there's a lot of work being done by the big companies looking at valorizing waste streams and things like that. But there's certainly other opportunities for farmers and to come together either individually or to work individually or collectively around those. And as part of the Valpro Path project, we're looking at can some of the processing steps be brought back onto farm to create added value for farmers as well too. So it's not just about maybe growing a crop. There could be an opportunity for a farmer to dehull it on farm and then sell the dehulled product at a higher value to the processor as well. So all of those kind of questions need to be teased out as well.
Maeve, how do you manage the risk if you come up with an idea, say, like I remember during your presentation you mentioned the potential for pollution swapping, or if is there a market there now, or if the market will be there in 5 years' time? How is that managed?
That's a good question, Colin. And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that. And even just kind of the whole financing aspect, there's a lot of work being done by others in this space, looking at green financing and things like that. And my colleague Siobhan Jordan was doing some kind of work in that space. And we had an event there last year trying to bring the investment people together around the bioeconomy as well. So that whole area of finance and de-risking, that there is work to be done in that space. But the NTMA kind of funding body, they are very interested in the bioeconomy. So there is potential for significant investment in this space, and ICOS and others are interested in as well. Enterprise Ireland are supporting that feasibility study that was mentioned there. So there are people who are working to de-risk some of that, all right. But it's an area, I suppose, that that whole kind of green finance, there are opportunities, I think, through that. And Enterprise Ireland, again, would be interested in that space as well.
Maeve, there's one question here that's kind of, I suppose, close to myself and Cathal when we talk about water quality. And it's about, for example, the anaerobic digester industry incorporating sludges, but also producing energy while protecting water quality. But I think the question is, how do you go back to the start? How do you ensure that we're not creating other problems down the road by focusing on one particular aspect or product? So that's maybe feeding back to the risk question earlier.
Yeah, and it goes back to, modeling. We don't have to do all of these things to figure out do they work or not. And that's the beauty of the models. And, so there are models developed by various people and they can be refined. So I think that we just have to do that modeling work and kind of get some of those answers before we leap. I think is kind of the answer there, really.
There's a really good question here around, it's very practical. It depends what part of the country. And have you found a use for rushes yet?
Rushes are very valuable in their own right. They provide ecosystem services and things like that. But I suppose the challenge is harvesting the rushes too. I think, if you can come up with a solution to harvesting rushes, on a year-round basis, we might be onto something there.
Yeah, and we're nearly out of time now, Maeve, but I suppose the one big thing that every farmer will always ask me when we get into this kind of conversation is, if we do, and I think there's examples out there already, but where will the money go? Where will it end up in the farmer's pocket, I suppose?
And that comes back to the points I didn't get a chance to really go into, is that whole idea of justice. And part of the question with regard to justice is the distributional justice. Who does benefit from this? And that really is, when people are trying to develop these projects, they have to think about that and think about who's benefiting. But there's an onus on farmers to speak up, and to get involved through their co-ops in this as well, and see, ensure that they get the benefits from it. We don't just want farmers to be commodity suppliers to the bioeconomy. There are opportunities for farmers to through their co-ops, for example, and through the establishment of other smaller local co-ops, to derive some of the benefits themselves, as well. But absolutely, those questions of who's getting the benefits and who's being negatively impacted as well. So we do have to be very conscious of those types of questions and make sure that they're being asked and appropriately answered.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned before we come on air, you have some more information coming out on tea research, is it? Later this month?
That's right, yes. So the winter issue of the Teagasc publication Tea Research, which is available online, as most of you will know as well, the winter issue of that will be addressing the bioeconomy, so an opportunity to know a little bit more about what Teagasc in particular is doing in this space.
Brilliant. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but just want to thank everybody for the questions. And Maeve, there's a lot of comments coming in to say how much they enjoyed and well done on your presentation. And it's really interesting. I think it's after opening up a million more questions for me. So I think we're going to have to chat to you again at some stage in the future. I know there's so much to discuss. But thank you so much for your presentation. It's really an interesting topic, and keep up the good work. And Fiona, thanks a million as always for helping out with questions today. And just want to thank Yvonne Maher in the background for helping us manage the webinar as well. Yvonne is always looking after us, keeping the show on the road for us. Next week, unfortunately, we have a change to the schedule. So do keep an eye out during the week to see an update for next week. But do tune in again next Friday at 9:30. Slán go fóill.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.